Hello, how's it going?
Hold on one second. I'm sorry.
No problem.
All
right, can you hear me good?
I can't tell if it's me or if it's you. Just say something again.
Testing.
You're audible. You're coming a little broken, but it could be on my end. But
It might possibly be my mic. If so, I apologize. But we'll do the best we can, I suppose. All right, very fun topic today. The destruction of Alderaan was completely justified. So to start with this, for everybody in the audience that may not know, this is from Star Wars, where the Death Star blows up a planet in Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. And so I'm going to give some of the background about the planet of Alderaan from the Star Wars universe. So Alderaan was in the core war. It's in the center of the galaxy. It's one of the wealthiest planets in all of the Star Wars galaxy. Among like the top 5 is actually what it's estimated to be. It has strong trade relations with most other planets in the known galaxy. It is ruled by a monarchy called the Organa family, which Princess Leia was adopted by them, Leia Organa. It also, Bail Organa, her father, who adopted her, is one of the founding members of the Rebel Alliance. And so with that out of the way, let's get into why the Empire was justified in destroying the planet of Alderaan. So to start, we have to discredit everything that Princess Leia basically says in Episode 4. For one, she has no evidence, and she gives no evidence to back up her claims. And 2, she's also a pathological liar. When she was found on the shuttle, and Darth Vader and them invaded the shuttle, she said that she was strictly on a diplomatic mission. She had no clue what the plans were. She clearly was more than willing to lie for what she believed was the right cause. Like when she lied about where the rebel base was, saying it was on Dantooine when in fact it was on Yavin 4. She's also an intergalactic spy. She was gathering information when inside the Imperial Senate, and obviously a rebel sympathizer. To continue on to that, she eventually goes on to help them get the plans to the Rebel Alliance to destroy the Death Star. Now, why I believe that the Empire was justified in destroying Alderaan is for a few reasons. One, they didn't know what they were doing with the plans. So the plans to the Death Star can obviously be used to destroy it. As we saw, it had a flaw in the design. But also it could be used to build another Death Star to possibly destroy Imperial planets, which is a massive problem if you are the Empire. So with Alderaan being one of the most stable and economically prosperous planets in the entire known galaxy, that is not a reality that we can just toss out of hand, because it's not that far-fetched. Secondly, this actually equates pretty relevantly to something that's happened in our world history, with being the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So while it is terrible that it happened, it is justified in the sense that if you destroy the main flow and the main leaders of a resistance group, it's going to prevent all-out war and possibly millions and millions of more lives lost. And so with that, I'll hear what my opponent has to say.
Hey, Chandler. So first off, thanks for the debate. I've actually had probably like a 3-month hiatus from QallOut. I've been pretty busy with my college. So if anybody's watching this, which right now we have 0, but I'm sure we'll get some people.
The finals for October is going on, so yeah. I'm sure they'll get to it.
All right, so I'm gonna jump right in here with my argument. So first off, I want to hone in on so let me rewind a little bit, actually. So we're going off of what is considered canonical in Star Wars, correct?
For the most part, yes. For things like, I have a statistic about how many people inhabit the galaxy, since the canon doesn't go so much on that. But stuff is specific storylines that are in galaxies, I don't think that should be considered necessarily. Right.
Well, there was some confusion there with me because kind of Disney owns the intellectual property, and they sort of wiped the slate.
Oh yeah, they retconned it. Yeah.
Hold on 1 second. Go. No, I'm doing something right now, buddy. I'm in a debate. You can say hi.
Hi.
Hello.
All right, go. No, go shut the door, please.
I know it's on too.
River. Go. All right, I'm sorry about that. that dad life though. All right, so all right, the Honan on. So just looking at the subject of the debate, I don't think really there's anything that warrants a specific definition besides justified. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know a lot about Star Wars. I've seen all the movies, but I don't know nearly as much as you obviously do. What I do know about, however, is sort of the ethical considerations of going into war. It's one of the most widely studied specific topic in ethics. We have jus ad bello, which is justice before war, and jus in bello. And there's a couple of specific considerations that are widely agreed upon, at least in our galaxy, about how people should conduct themselves in war. And we've seen these principles. They actually come from Thomas Aquinas, but we've seen them cited in trials at The Hague, the Nuremberg trials. When we bring people up on war crime charges, generally we're citing these specific considerations. So I'm going to run through them. And then I am going to apply them to our contention here. So the first one that I want to talk about is proportionality. It is my understanding that up to this point in the rebellion, the Rebel Alliance hadn't made any sort of massive, catastrophic, planet-wide attack. You could argue that perhaps after the destruction of the Death Star, the a proportional response might have been destroying the planet. But they hadn't done that yet. So proportionality, we're talking about a small group of rebels versus a massive military-industrial complex. Military necessity. Now, you talk about how Alderaan is one of the wealthiest planets. That doesn't necessarily mean that that the whole planet should have been destroyed. The whole planet, that it was necessary for the cause of the Empire. Distinction, I think is pretty self-evident. I mean, we're talking about a planet. How large was the population of the planet approximately? Do you have that?
So Obi-Wan Kenobi in the movie said that there's the voice as if millions of voices cried out in terror when suddenly silenced. So it'd be somewhere in the single-digit millions, most likely.
Okay, so millions of voices cried out. Obviously, all of those are not going to be legitimate military targets. They're not going to be armed commands. There's going to be a huge contingent of civilians. Some of the other ones that aren't as relevant, fair treatment of prisoners of war. There was no attempts to actually capture anyone. They were just wiped out. And finally, no means malum se, which no weapons that are inherently evil. Something like a flamethrower is outlawed in the conventions of war, the Geneva Convention. Mass rape, and the destruction of a planet, literally obliterating someone's world. I feel like it doesn't get much more evil than that. And all right, so then I'm going to real fast just do a quick rebuttal here. So it seems to me that you're trying to make an argument from moral realism, or something is morally correct if it is useful in this specific instance. That, to me, is different than saying something is justified. Something that is permissible under moral realism, I mean, you could get away with all sorts of things if it helps you win the war. That normatively might be considered not acceptable between two honorable combatants, which is the cornerstone of just war. And if we accept the word justified, I believe that we should look to just war. And with that, I will pass it back to you, my friend.
So to start with some of the points that you made, just to address those real quick. So you talk about how this was the Rebel Alliance did not hit the Empire in a major way. So in Rogue One, just immediately preceding, the start of Episode 4, which is the episode where the destruction of Alderaan occurs, the Rebels have a large attack on the planet of Scarif, which houses all of the Empire's sensitive data. So first of all, they don't exactly know what all that the Rebels got off the planet, whether they could, try to collapse their economy, but they do know for certain they have the Death Star plan, so they don't know exactly what else. Past that, once again, they don't know, assuming they found Princess Leia's ship, they knew that it was connected to the plans. Her father, being Bail Organa, one of the most wealthiest, powerful people in the galaxy, was clearly a Rebel sympathizer because directly after Order 66, he met up with Master Yoda and he met up with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Past that, it would not be that out of the ordinary to say they could use the plans for the Death Star in a way that's harmed. So in a way, it's almost justified as a preemptive attack because it's going to save possibly millions and millions more lives. Now, I know millions of lives sounds like a lot, but in the Star Wars universe, it's not quite as large as it is in our world. There's 100 quadrillion sentient beings and 50 million populated planets in the Star Wars universe. So while this does seem like a lot on us, because we all live on one Earth and there's 7 billion people on it, in the Star Wars universe, it is much more equivalent to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which most people do kind of relate this to. Once again, with it being very wealthy, sure, not everybody on the planet was wealthy, but when the leader of one of the strongest economies in the galaxy is directly related to the Rebels, as he was one of the founding members of the Rebel Alliance, it's not unreasonable to say that he's probably supplying them funds, arms, anything else he needs. Now, I understand what you talk about with, war crimes, mass atrocities against civilians, and that is a part of this debate. But the lives that could have been lost with the potential creation of a Death Star out of Alderaan and them just attacking Imperial homeworlds is not necessarily enough to outweigh the lives lost, or that does outweigh the lives that were lost on the planet Alderaan and the destruction of those 2 million people when they could blow up a world like Coruscant, which is suspected to have trillions of people inhabiting it as the whole thing's a planet. And so I'll pass that back to you on that note.
Where are you getting your sources from for all the people? Is it canon or is it not canon?
So the number of people in the universe is from Star Wars Galaxies, which is something that was published by that's not considered canon as of this. But the people that are on Alderaan, and in the canon, we know there's at least 900 trillion people in the galaxy. Sentient beings with 100 quadrillion is not canon. There's known to be at least several tens of millions of planets in the canon. 50 million is from the galaxies as well.
Uh-huh. Okay, all right. So to me, the fact that there are many, many people, the population is large throughout the whole galaxy. I'm curious how one defines sentient beings. I mean, is an octopus a sentient being? I don't know, jellyfish. But the fact that there are many sentient souls, quote unquote, to say that makes slaughtering millions permissible because there's trillions? No, you're still slaughtering millions and millions of people. And without proportionality, without attempting to mitigate any sort of loss of life, you're just coming in there with giving them no chance to escape, no chance to no prior warning. Now, in your opening statement, you brought up Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I have questions about whether that was morally justified, but at least in those instances, leaflets were dropped. The civilian population was told several days in advance, hey, there's gonna be a massive bomb. You guys need to escape. You need to get out of here. Take your children and flee. The Empire afforded no such luxury to the people of Alderaan. Innocent women, children, instantly snuffed out. And when you phrase it like that and you frame it that way, the sort of the arguments that you're making to me fall flat. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about the little babies, the Alderanis. Now you talk about how this may have prevented further war. And I actually would like to quote Princess Leia when she says, "The tighter that you try to hold us in your grip, the more planets will fall through your grasp." And I think that's spot on. To think that such an overwhelmingly such an overkill attack would subvert violence, to me is foolish. If the flames of rebellion were in their growing phase before, we're talking about a full-on wildfire afterwards. If you were on the party or on the fence, if you were a neutral party and you saw this happen, what else would you do besides take up arms against the rebellion, or against the Empire? Now, with that said, I still feel like there's a whole lot of my points that are still left on the table. All of the criteria for Jus in Bello, how an honorable combatant conducts himself in war, I don't see how it fits any of them. I'm not going to repeat them because I don't want to. I've already said them in my opening, but these are the standards that, at least in the Western tradition of just war theory, of ethical combatants, are the most accepted things. And if it doesn't at least meet some of these standards, I mean, just think if this was after World War II, would Darth Vader and the Emperor, if they were stood before a neutral party, a neutral set of jurors, and they were judged upon these criteria, I mean, they would be hung and they'd be shot. They'd be taking cyanide tablets. And back to you, my friend.
Okay. So to start, talking about how they could have been warned. To that, I will say that nobody knew the Death Star existed, and also the plans for the Death Star were basically on a floppy disk. And so that is so easy to get off a planet if you are aware that your planet is about to be destroyed. So I don't think that's a feasible option. On to the point that you brought up about how is it justified or is it a war crime? And for that question to be answered, we basically have to ask, is it a legitimate military target? So with Alderaan likely and evidence supporting that it was the main economic hub of the rebellion because it was one of the only core worlds to support them. They possibly had military intel on several different aspects of the Empire's army, and them known to be having the plans, or the princess of the planet to have the plans of the biggest weapon in galactic history that they could probably easily recreate. I think it's justified as a military target on that terms, especially in the grand scale of the galaxy. If they blew up if let's say Alderaan built a Death Star, sent it to the planets next to them, all the planets in the core world are just as, if not more, inhabited than Alderaan, including Coruscant, which is very close, is the most populated planet in the galaxy. So you really do have to argue, is it a legitimate military target? Now you have somebody like Grand Moff Tarkin, who's on top of the bridge of the Death Star, and he says, "Princess Leia, tell us where the plans are, and tell us where the rebel base is, or we're going to blow up your planet." She chooses to retain that information. She tries to lie her way out of it, and it doesn't quite work her way. So she's clearly choosing at that point her plans and keeping the rebel base safe over her people. Now, it's not like all the people in Alderaan were just these peaceful bystanders either, all right? They were not the natural inhabitants of that planet. They were humans from a different planet that came and conquered the native species and committed genocide on that species on the planet, and ethnic cleansing as well. Originally, and then they eventually moved to genocide because they wanted to kill them all and take over the planet and harvest it for its natural resources. So they were very unethical beings. Their leader, it was a monarchy, they all worshipped their leader, the Organa family, was a founding member of the Rebel Alliance, was a sympathizer of the Jedi, constantly did not go with the Imperial regulations or restrictions because he knew where the other Skywalker was being held and did not tell the Empire. On top of that, they were quoted by a Darth Vader comic published by Disney to have some of the best defense systems in the galaxy. So it would cost several lives if they were to do a ground invasion of the planet of Alderaan to try and get these plans. And with the plans being able to be transmitted by satellite or, like I said, on a floppy disk, there's no guarantee they still could have found those plans if they warned the people or if they did a regular invasion. And so I'll pass it back to you.
All right, so you said that no one knew the Death Star existed. If we're going with our analogy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, no one knew that existed either. It was kept under wraps. But yet still they provided, like, the way they worded it was, something really bad's going to happen. You guys should leave these cities. And that still absolutely could have been an option, even if not for a couple days, then at least, I don't know, one day, 12 hours, some sort of chance for people to find respite before they were snuffed out. Now, you try to make the justification that an entire planet is a legitimate military target because they were an economic hub, because they supported the Rebel Alliance, and because they possibly had the plans. Now, the last point, possibly had the Death Star plans. And that matters because Alderaan or the Rebels could have made their own Death Star. How massive was it of a project for the Empire to build the Death Star?
Well, for them, the main struggle came with finding an engineer that could actually develop the technology and create the plans. In Rogue One, that is Jane Erso's father has to develop all the plans and basically build it up by scratch. And so while it is a difficult project for the Empire, and it did take them about 10 years or so to make, it's not unreasonable to say that with the plans they couldn't do the same thing, especially when the Empire was having to harvest the kyber crystals which fuel the Death Star from other planets. But they're actually, Alderaan is suspected to have kyber crystals, first of all, in its natural mineral. And then also on the other planets in the core world are also known to have kyber crystals on them as well.
But we're talking about a planet made out of metal, right? Made out of harvested resources.
A small moon.
And the Empire had far more access to those. You know, you would need. I mean, I'm speculating here. I'm just imagining, but to harvest. I mean, I don't know. Let me Google it. How much iron is on Earth? And we'll use that as a baseline. How much iron is on Earth?
Well, you also have to think that Alderaan being so wealthy, they had some of the strongest trade alliances in the entire galaxy with other planets. So it's not that unreasonable to say that it'd be that hard to get the metal, especially when there's 50 million planets. Like, there's going to be enough metal to build a small moon that's going to house about 1 million people.
Right. Well, to me, I'm not buying this. That there's the pressing possibility that Alderaan could have, or the Rebel Alliance could have created this Death Star for these reasons I talked about. It's a massive undertaking. I mean, they could have done something like a blockade. You said that they had some of the best defenses that may have precluded a ground invasion. That doesn't mean that they couldn't have done some sort of blockade. The Empire is always shown to be the more massive military fleet. So, I mean, they could have done that. They could have looked it's going to be hard to hide a star. I mean, just the gravity alone of a moon, it's going to affect other planets' orbits unless they're parking out in deep space somewhere, which I don't really think would have necessarily been realistic. But assuming that it was in some planet's solar system, up in their space dry docks or whatever, what have you, the fact that it alters gravitational pull, that on itself is going to give away the location to the Empire's astronomers long before it even has a chance to be finished. All right, let me see what else I have here. Actually, that was kind of my main point. But again, the fact that try to make the argument that an entire planet is a viable military target because it's economically prosperous and because it supports a rebellion that, in my opinion, I would make the argument for the rebellion was fighting a just war. If we look at the Jus in Bello, the other side of the ethical war theory, the rebels had just cause to take up arms. There was massive infringement of natural rights, self-determination. You know, the fact that the Empire subverted their previous forms of government, that to me lends credence to the fact that they should be taking up arms against the Empire. But that's somewhat besides the point. And if we're just honing in on the conduct in war, And again, I mean, if we're talking about a Death Star that has so much power that it can destroy an entire planet, why can't they turn the power down and make targeted military strikes that could have decimated and even they could have knocked out their centers of commerce. They could have shown some sort of restraint outside of killing everyone. And with that, I'll get back to you.
Okay. So to start, you have you talked about how they could have a blockade and that would prevent the problem. So this actually, Empire tried this tactic. They used super star destroyers at the time because this preceded when the Death Star was invented, but it was called the Siege of Lothal. It is canon. It's in the Star Wars Rebels TV show that's currently on Disney XD. And inside the siege, they had the biggest fleet amassed in any Empire strike in history up to that point, and rebels were still able to get through, and this is a ship carrying human bodies. Now, how easy do you think it would be to transmit a satellite radio transmission that takes about 20 seconds to download and receive off of a planet? And talk about how, they couldn't have hit it building right off Alderaan, but with 50 million galaxies, and obviously the Empire not being able to chart all those because they couldn't find the rebel bases and all the rebels that was clearly on Yavin 4, it's not that hard to say they couldn't build a small moon somewhere in some isolated part of the galaxy that's possibly controlled by the Hutt cartel or some other, entity that the Empire is not completely in control of. You talk about how they could have turned the sensors down and just, let's say, attack the capital. That's not really completely feasible because, one, with the planet being so developed, most of the entire planet was a city to some point. They did have some, terrain, but it was mostly city and very industrialized. And so attacking a single target wouldn't necessarily guarantee the job done and probably just raise rise to the people on that planet to become more envious. The Empire was trying to prevent full-out war, which I think is a good quality. And next, you argue that the rebels are fighting a just war. So to start with the point, the rebels, while they have some criticism, it's not the Empire was too terrible until the destruction of Alderaan, and then they kind of have an argument. But even then, it was still justified, even though it was a little nasty and had some bloodshed. So to start, the Empire brought in several years of peace, like 20 years of peace. The previous government being, in Coruscant, they have the Senate. It fell into infighting and caused the Galactic Civil War between the Separatists and Count Dooku and the droids, and eventually the clone army that would be raised by the Republic. On top of that, the Empire even brought back the Imperial Senate, which they let vote on everything, and then just had to get signed off by the Emperor, similar to how America, we have the Congress, and it either gets vetoed or signed by the President. So it just added in an extra system of checks and balances as far as the government went. And then eventually, after all these systems started to rebel, they then eventually put in the regional governors that did have control over the planet. It's sort of a martial law, but that was only an extreme scenario. So, just overall, it is a legitimate military target for the fact that the rebels ultimately did in the war. So clearly it was feasible, and they did not care what they had to do it. They, slaughtered hundreds of millions of stormtroopers. When they blew up the Death Star, they killed stormtroopers, the people cleaning the toilets, and other prisoners of war, political prisoners that were on the Death Star. So they did not care what it took to end the war. They were almost like a terrorist group in that way. You have people like Saul Guerrero from World War I that are quoted saying they'll do anything what it takes to win the war, and they don't have a restraint. They clearly are shown to use any tactics they want. And so I don't think it's that unreasonable to say, hey, if they have weapons that could possibly destroy planets in the galaxy, trillions and trillions of lives, we need to crush any possibility that they're able to obtain this, because we have maintained peace for a long time, and this is just the ace that we have up our sleeve. And with that, I'll pass it back to my opponent.
So I think it's kind of humorous that you're bringing up that the Republic before the Empire was this war-torn place. The Republic had these problems because of the Emperor. No? I mean, it was sort of his grand scheme that started the trade war, and then which led to the Clone War and what have you. So we're talking about the guy that is the Emperor causing the war. And I may be mistaken. I'm pretty sure this isn't canon anymore because of Disney and stuff. But it was my understanding that there was like a long sort of golden era of peace and prosperity in the Republic before the events of Episode 1. Like it'd been going pretty strong for a while after they kind of defeated the Sith and stuff. So, I mean, if you want to talk about like who has the better track record of peace, I think it would be obvious that it's the Republic. Now, I wanted to make the distinction between what the rebels did in destroying the Death Star and what the destruction of Alderaan by the Emperor. So first off, so if we again going back to my values, going back to just war theory, military necessity. That for the rebels, that absolutely was military necessity. Now, is it military necessary, as in there's no other option for the Empire to destroy Alderaan? I don't think. I mean, it's one planet amongst however many others were rebelling. I think that there was a lot. There's more different ways that they could have gone about this. That wasn't the only recourse they had, as opposed to the rebels. Well, if they let this stand, then they're literally just going to get obliterated planet by planet by planet. Then if we move on to proportionality, so the Empire, they drew first blood. They're the ones that said that, hey, we're willing to make this a catastrophic conflict. In that way, it was proportional. They've already they're answering in kind. And then distinction. I didn't see. I mean, you talk about people cleaning the toilets, the latrines on the Death Star. I mean, hey, we saw a fair amount of the inside of the Death Star in Episode 4. I didn't see any civilian contractors. I don't have any reason to believe there was any civilian contractors on there. I think they were all military. And even if you are a toilet cleaner, if you're wearing a military uniform, you are still considered a combatant in just war theory. Even if you're carrying out you're like a dental hygienist, you're still a target. And to me, that lends much more credence to the idea that the whole planet, the whole Death Star was a legitimate target. Not to mention the fact that the entire purpose of the thing was to destroy things, to destroy planets, as opposed to an actual planet, Alderaan, where there's people that are going to the market and having sex and experiencing all the wonderful things that life has to offer to us. They're not just up there cleaning toilets so stormtroopers can take a shit and man their gun posts. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, to that, I'll say, you said you didn't see anybody else on the Death Star with such problems. Well, Princess Leia, first of all, is on cell block AA-23, detention cell 2187. So clearly there were other prisoners on there. They didn't just randomly pick a number. And if you were going to be held prisoner on the Death Star, you probably have some significance in some way. You say that the Empire drew first blood. I disagree. I think when the rebels invaded on the Scarif in the Battle of Scarif and attacked a Imperial information tower and captured sensitive data to the Empire is completely justified to try and make sure that information does not get into a hand of ragtag rebels that are extremists and are fans of guerrilla fighting. To go on to some of your points, you talk about, all the people in Alderaan, they're just enjoying life, and that, the rebels were justified to destroy the Death Star and whatnot. The Death Star was only fired one time, and that was on Alderaan, and they even built another one. They were going to use it on Yavin 4 because they realized, hey, they have the Death Star plans, and so now we have to destroy who actually has the Death Star plans, because it's just such a, terrible, terrible problem if they're able to amount funds to build a Death Star. And the rebels have moved base several times. They used to be on Dantooine. Before that, they were on Lothal, like I talked about earlier. They had a rebel base in Lothal. And so it's very easy for them to move and create a base and establish weaponry like we saw in Hoth, when they eventually moved to Hoth after they escaped Yavin 4. And so it's a pressing issue how these rebels that are proven to do anything it takes to win and are willing to do preemptive strikes on information centers of the Empire have the plans to the most destructive power in the universe, and them having it compared to a empire that has been peaceful for several years, still has dictatorship, and has even improved upon the democratic system of its predecessor, being the republic, I don't think you can equate the two powers in having this destructive capability. And I'll pass it back to you on that.
So I wanted to clarify my point. When I said the Empire drew first blood, I probably misspoke a little bit. What I meant is the Empire was the one that escalated it to a level of extreme loss of life. They didn't. I don't know who drew like quote unquote first blood. You know, it was probably the sheriff in the small town with Rambo. I don't know. I don't know much about Star Wars, but that was my point. The Empire took it to that place, and I think there's a pretty apt analogy here. If this is morally justified, what we're talking about in Star Wars, then us just glassing Afghanistan after 9/11 would be morally justified. And I'm sure that there are probably going to be people that are watching this debate that are going to be like, hell yeah, that's what we should have done. But I think for most of us that are like, on planet Earth and actually care about humanity and care about the inherent rights of mankind, that seems less than palatable. And with that, I'll pass back to you.
Okay. So to talk about your point with Iran, it's not equivalent to 9/11. I disagree. I think it'd be equivalent if the U.S. developed a weapon that could destroy countries. The Prince of Iran comes over to the United States after several guerrilla attacks. They have a full-on attempt of an invasion on an information center, steal that data along with unknown other types of data, go back to their country where they have a seemingly unlimited supply of money and funds. At that point, it is justified, especially when these people, not necessarily Iran, but the rebels are willing to do anything it takes to win. Anything it takes to win. They don't care who dies as long as at the end of the day, they get the victory. So I think in that way, it's not equivalent to just an attack like 9/11. If the rebels just attacked some Imperial cargo ship and then nothing else happened, that's one thing. But they stole some of the most sensitive data to ever exist in the galaxy. And that's just absurd that, that it's just okay for them to have that and that we should drop pamphlets or whatever because they have so much destructive capability when these people are far more drastic and outrageous than the Empire was because the Empire actually promoted democracy and organized government compared to the rebels who were just a ragtag group of rebel extremists that were willing to do whatever it takes to win and, mainly had guerrilla fighting.
So you keep saying that they would do whatever it takes to win. Now, there's two possibilities here. The first being that, yeah, they really would do anything that cross any threshold, kill any person to win. And the second being that this is sort of puffery or hyperbole that soldiers will say to one another in a tense situation. I don't want to get too much into it, but I've been to war and something like that. Yeah, we talk about what we would do to defeat the Taliban, but that didn't mean that we went out and committed war crimes. I mean, do you have any examples of the Rebel Alliance that committing war crimes before any of this happened?
Okay, so to start with that idea, with how they're willing to do anything it takes to win. Did you ever see Star Wars Rogue One? First of all.
Yeah.
Okay. So her father was the engineer that was developing the Death Star. Do you remember how the council in there said, "Oh, we're going to go rescue your father off this Imperial, engineering base"? And then they told the captain, I don't recall his name, but they told the captain of that, party to actually kill him on site. And so he's up in the rain by himself and he has the orders to snipe the head engineer. So that's just killing a random civilian that's doing this job for the Empire. They also launched the attack on a scientific and informational, developing center, not a legitimate military target, whatsoever. They have a guide. The Death Star plans weren't there. It was just a guy that developed it. So that's going to do no good necessarily. So they attacked that, and they're killing just the guy that's doing his job. So that clearly is showing that they're willing to do anything to win because they're going to kill him instead of capturing him and bringing him back home. Well,
the problem with that is what the Empire is doing, forcing a non-combatant to or arguably forcing because I think he was the the protagonist's father, his leanings were towards the rebellion. Yeah, he had some ties to the rebellion.
Not directly. He used to work for the Empire, and he left when he had a family. I wouldn't say there's really much evidence to say he leaned towards the rebellion, besides the fact that he entrusted his daughter into the care of somebody that was a part of the rebellion.
Okay.
Necessarily.
All right. Okay. But either way, the enforcement. So, all right. You know what? I'm gonna flip this. So look, this guy drafted into the Empire's service, forced to build a military weapon. At that point, he is a legitimate military target. In the same ways that a targeted killing could have been used against, somebody that's developing HME or developing chemical weapons in Iraq or Afghanistan. I think it would absolutely be more morally permissible to go in and do a targeted killing against this one particular person. Now, if that's your example of the rebels using of their war crimes, I mean, to me, that's pretty weak. We're talking about the target of killing of one potential combatant versus millions of lives, right? I mean, if the rebels were going out and just slaughtering civilians en masse and doing all these onerous things, well, maybe there was an argument there. But I mean, is that all you got? Is that the best? Is the best example of a war crime by the rebellion that there is?
So most of this would be considered pre-destruction of Alderaan, right? And at that point, before the Battle of Scarif, the rebels did not, people like Salgarev, for example, were considered terrorists and extreme, and they were willing to commit genocide to accomplish those goals. You see that on Geonosis, in one of the episodes of Star Wars Rebels, where they find some cells and some evidence of what the Empire's doing, and he's just willing to beat the crap and kill the local Geonosian species to try and get answers on what they're building for the Empire. So he's willing to kill anyone to try and get the answers to what he's looking for, because he feels that it's that dire to try and defeat the Empire.
That's a slaughter on Geonosia. I'm sorry.
Geonosis. It was in an episode of Star Wars Rebels. They find some of the local Geonosians that are still left over from the battle that happened to start the Clone War. And he is willing to do whatever it takes to try and get the answers out of this Geonosian civilian.
I'm sorry. I'm just reading about it real fast.
Okay, not a problem. But yeah, so and he's willing to kill whatever's left. Now, some of the Geonosians were killed in a chemical accident that happened because of the Empire. So that is something happened. But the remainders of that, he was clearly willing to torture, hurt, destroy, kill anybody he needs to try and get the answers. And so they are pushing the boundaries of the moral line there when it's just a civilian and a non-combatant, and they're trying to get answers when there's no evidence that local Geonosian actually supported the Empire or did anything wrong. But I feel like we're still kind of not hitting the overlapping arch that they had the means to destroy planets, and they only used it at one time when it was very dire that somebody else could have power. When the rebels were, constantly doing runs to attack the scientific center, were attacking Scarif and information center, compared to the Empire, who was mainly just did blockades of other planets, engaged in some small battles with the rebellion, and then only had this one massive demonstration of the weapon. On top of that, you argued that, it's justified to kill him because he was developing weapons. Well, first of all, the Death Star was already developed by that point. It was already completed. It just hadn't been tested yet. So it was already done, and they actually had knowledge of this because he left a message to his daughter, and he even said, hey, I actually programmed the flaw in the Death Star, so if you guys come pick me up, I'll tell you what the flaw in the Death Star is. And that's why they need to go get the plans in the first place, because they failed their mission. But so they kill somebody that's not only trying to help the rebellion, but just, they are asked to kill him, even though he's trying to help the rebellion. But two, on top of that, he had already developed the weapon. So there's no issue of, in the future, he could, develop the Death Star, because it already had happened. And I'll give you the last 48 seconds.
Yeah, I usually recap my argument, but I'm not. I'll recap it real fast.
Okay.
Houston Bell is clear. Distinction, proportionality, military necessity. The Empire failed. The Empire was not justified. I mean, we can make an argument for moral realism, but that to me is a whole different can of worms. But I don't think you really. You kind of went there at the beginning, but I didn't see a whole lot of it, so I didn't really bother rebutting it. But anyway, hey, you're from Murfreesboro, yeah?
No, I'm from Georgia.
Oh, I thought you were in Tennessee.
No, I'm from Georgia.
All right, well, thanks for the debate, man. Have a good night.
Anytime. Good.